This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Ivan Jansen. This show, of course, always live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Today, we talk to the Independent Police Investigative Directorate about the South African Police Service. It's been another deadly weekend on our roads, and today our question relates to that. How do we stop the carnage on our roads? That's the question that pops up in front of you at SABC Newsroom, of course, is where you can interact with us. We'll also look at the escalating crisis in Syria as thousands more flee the once proud nation. ISIS continues their campaign of destroying historical sites in territories that they're in command of. We'll close the show today with the opening of the Women's Development Resources Centre in Lusigazigi in the Eastern Cape. But first, let's get the news from Anine Dormel.
Good morning, I'm Anine Dormel. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Mining industry stakeholders are expected to hold a top-level meeting to find ways to save jobs in the sector today. The Department of Mineral Resources unions and others in the industry are set to meet. This after mining giant Lonmin announced that over 1,400 miners had taken voluntary retrenchment as it prepares to retrench a total of 6,000 workers by the end of the year. President Jacob Zuma has called for strict adherence to the rules of the road by all motorists. More than 100 people reportedly died in road accidents across the country over the weekend, with at least 46 people in the Eastern Cape province alone. The Eastern Cape government says it will assist families who have lost loved ones in 2 accidents in the province.
Government will find ways to assist, will support these communities. This is a disaster. By far, we've never had anything of this magnitude.
Meanwhile, Swaziland's police are investigating the cause of the pile-up that has claimed the lives of scores of young women. On Friday, a disputed number of maidens on their way to the redance were killed in the accident. The Swaziland government says 13 people were killed in the crash, but opposition groups have given tolls varying from 38 to 65. Calls have been made for the redance ceremony to be postponed, but authorities say even though this year's event had a bitter beginning, culture dictates that it can't be moved. In Saudi Arabia, a fire that has swept through an oil workers' residential compound has killed around 10 people. Reports suggest that 259 people were injured in the incident. And in sports, Netball Union claims South Africa's last medal of the IAAF Athletics World Championships in Beijing. She grabbed the country's 3rd medal after winning bronze in the women's javelin. South Africa finished 13 on the medals table, the country's best performance at the event since 2009. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Simply search for SABC Newsroom. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anina. There's no denying that complaints of police officers torturing civilians are on the rise. This is according to the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, who last week arrested 10 more policemen. The group, who were formerly charged for allegedly torturing and killing Kutazile Mbendu, was in custody. Last week also, South Africa saw 8 former police officers convicted of dragging Mozambican taxi driver Mida Masia behind a police van. He then later died in police cells. This as another shocking video of alleged police brutality in Douglasdale in Gauteng did the rounds online last week. Now today, we are joined from Pretoria by the IPID's national spokesperson, Grace Langer, and by the IPID's provincial head of Gauteng, Robbie Rabu. A very good morning to you guys. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Evan.
Morning.
Robbie, if I can start with you, I just want to get a quick update about this latest case involving 10 officers last week.
The 10 police officers that were arrested are members of the TRT in Tembisa. One of the members comes from the Olifantsfontein police station. What happened in December, on the 4th of December, this victim was arrested by the police after he was apprehended by the tracker guys. And the police took him and assaulted him, and then what happened is he was very badly assaulted to the extent that he died 4 days after that at the hospital. And we were then called upon to investigate. And after that, as you've seen on Thursday, the arrest took place after the NPA gave us an order to arrest the guys.
Grace, I'd like to come over to you and look at the overall picture nationwide. The picture is often painted that these kinds of incidents are on the rise. What are your investigations showing then?
Our investigation does not show that this kind of incident are on the rise, even though with all other offences, 2013. From 2013 to 2014, there was a decline with regard to all the other offences, except in instances of torture, where it went up from 50 to 78. But overall, the offences have declined.
Grace, technology seems to be changing the way that you have to work now with regards to the kinds of incidents we see on social media, the videos, and so forth. How are you guys going to respond to technology and to the use of technology, maybe?
Technology, it's very good and it's assisting us in our investigations as long as people who are taking videos or pictures can be willing to come forward and help in testifying and giving confirmation that this video is authentic. So we are able to use that and we're able to get a conviction out of that. It is good, but would encourage the members of the society to come forward and help us fight crime.
Robbie, are we going into a future where our police officers on their person will have a video camera so that all the activities can be recorded for evidence?
That is the proposal from the ministry side and from Parliament side, that they would like a situation where in the future we would see the frontline staff in SABS actually having the body cameras that would actually help them. It will not only help towards preventing crime that is committed by SABS, by members of the police, but also with regard to easier managing of crime. It will be easier for them to actually track and trace those things that are actually happening when they are on duty.
Grace, at the IPID, we see these instances of police brutality, but right next to that we see cases of police killings also very much on the increase. Are you afraid that there might be a link between the two? Are you looking at this?
No, we need to separate the cases here. The police officers have the responsibility to abide by the law, to abide by the Constitution, and to apply what they've been trained at the colleges on how to handle a suspect, how to deal with a suspect when they make arrest. Because it's not all people or suspects that are fighting police on arrest, but at the same time, yes, we are concerned with the number of police killings, because without the police, South Africa is going to be a mess. I think this is a societal problem now. It needs an integrated strategy. It needs political buy-in. It needs community buy-in. You need all of us to work together in saving our police officers, because it's not all of them who are involved in these criminal activities.
You talk about training. Robbie, talk to us about training at the IPID. Are you happy with the level of training within our police force? And one should always look to improve whatever it is that you do. Are we on that road?
I think the training of our police officers is up to scratch currently. We can't actually say that they are not being trained. I think the only problem that we really have to deal with is the attitude of members on the ground. You know, so there's nothing wrong with the training that they are receiving. The training is actually very good. So we just have to actually work very hard to change the attitude of the police towards the citizens of these countries.
How do you do that, Grace? How do you change that attitude within the police? And also, do you believe that there's a culture developing of brutality or heavy-handedness amongst our police officers?
I believe it's a matter of ignorance, and we need to enhance education within the police service, and the management of police also must train people. I mean, we have a situation, for instance, I'll give an example. On Thursday, when we went to arrest 10 police officers, this case is investigated by a female investigator who received a very cold reception, and you could see colleagues of those police officers were angry, and she just had to, you know, contain herself. She just had to remember the role, her role and the purpose, and also to understand the mind of the suspect, the mind of the family members, the mind of their colleagues. So if IPID can do the same, it means SAPS officials must do the same when they arrest members of the public.
Now, we've seen a couple of high-profile cases in the last couple of weeks, Robbie. There's the Douglas Dale one, of course. We all know what happened in the Mida Masia case and so forth. Just tell us, how do you pick up an investigation like this, and what procedures do you follow?
The kind of investigation that should be followed is we would encourage the communities to come forward with incidents like this, like the one of Douglas Dale. But is it very much important that when this cell phone footage is actually being taken by our people, they need to actually not confront the police with that, because they might end up being victims themselves. But what is also important that we need to highlight is once you take a decision to take a video footage with your cell phone, you must actually even be available to actually authenticate that video so that it would help in the investigation of the crime, because without you authenticating that video footage, we've got no case against those members.
Can I also add maybe an assist now? In terms of Section 29 of IPID Act number 1 of 2011, the police have an obligatory to report cases to IPID. Once an incident takes place, the police must go and attend the scene. If they realize there's a police involved or a police firearm used, they immediately call IPID standby numbers. They have IPID standby numbers all over the provinces, and then IPID dispatch officials on standby to go to attend the scene. Once they've attended the scene, the following day we register the case on our system, we analyze it, we allocate it to an investigator who will then start with the investigation.
Well, Robbie, last one. You've got about a minute to tell us. Our police take a lot of criticism always in South Africa, as all the organs of state, it seems, takes criticism. How do we compare to the rest of the world with regards to the issue of, call it, brutality?
My view on the issue is that I think we've got less than 5% of police officers that are actually committing offences, especially the brutality thereof. You know, the majority of our police officers are actually trying very hard to do their jobs. So it's only these few that we really need to work hard to get to get them out of the police services. We wouldn't say the police service itself it's full of brutality, but then there's just those few that, in my view, they don't belong in the South African police services. They need to be rooted out of the system.
Very much for joining us. That's the spokesperson of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, Grace Langer, and Robbie Raburabu, who's the IPID provincial head of Gauteng. Now we move on. Of course, there were quite a few accidents over the weekend. President Jacob Zuma has expressed shock at the high number of deaths on the country's roads this weekend past. In a statement issued by the presidency, he's urged road users to be more vigilant to avoid accidents. The president also conveyed his condolences to the families who lost loved ones. Scores of people died in road accidents across the country, with more than 40 killed in 2 crashes in the Eastern Cape alone. Let's take a look at some of the comments that have been coming in following these very, very brutal and lethal accidents that we've seen. Now we've got Vuyani in Tanjana says, let's all pray for those who lost their lives in road accidents in both South Africa and Swaziland. May their souls rest in peace. Of course, in Swaziland, maidens on their way to the redance passed away in a shocking crash at Matsapa, just outside Matsapa Airport. Cancer Soldier says, I read somewhere Nigeria was second in ranking in deaths caused by road accidents in Africa after South Africa. Unfortunately, I read somewhere does not count as research. SA says, DTI is naive to think the USA road accidents dropped after raising the drinking age to 21. It will work in South Africa, forgetting USA has law enforcement. You kind of get the gist of it. Before you overtake, ask, is it legal? Is it safe? Is it necessary? Yes, we see every end of year, it is an absolute eye-opener when we travel, when one travels on the highways of South Africa, how irresponsible we behave on the road, how bad we drive on the roads, how terrible we overtake, and most importantly for what I see is how we don't heed the laws of the roads. If you see a sign that says stop, you have to stop. If you see no overtaking on a solid white line, you can't. But we don't. We just ignore it, it seems. Anyhow, another deadly weekend on South Africa's roads it's been. But we move on to the tweet of the day. This one comes from Humanity First International, saying, if people from a developed country like Syria are fleeing as refugees to Europe, it is through desperation, and we should show some humanity. Yes, of course, after the break, we'll deal with Syria today, escalating crisis, humanitarian and otherwise in that country. The pick of the day, well, it comes from DJ Rubikonski, and it's captioned, thousands of people took to the streets in Dresden, in the former East Germany, I can tell you, on Saturday, to welcome refugees. The only country in Europe to be welcoming refugees is Germany, and we have to stand in solidarity with Germany. These people are not migrants. They're not coming there looking for work. They're coming as refugees because their countries have been bombed to smithereens. And we all know the reasons why. But let's move on and take a look at the front pages from around the globe. We start in Europe. The Times reports Tony Blair must explain to Parliament why he allegedly tried to save Colonel Gaddafi before the Allied bombing of Libya, senior MP said last night. Then in Washington, the Washington Post says the 71 people whose bodies were found in an abandoned truck on the main highway between Budapest and Vienna last week may have died at the hands of smugglers. And finally in Spain, El Mundo says Hungary is preparing to pass a law to punish with imprisonment those who break through the fence. Just finished. Now, Merkel fails Renzi Rajoy calling for urgent measures to solve this tragedy. It's simple. Take the fences away. The people coming into your country, they are refugees. We all have to open our doors. We can take the oil and resources out of their countries. We have to take the refugees. Let's take a look at what's happening in our courts here in South Africa today. We start in Johannesburg. The Eldorado Park community members are expected to protest at the Kliptown Magistrates Court during the court appearance of a notorious drug lord who was arrested on Friday night. In Cape Town, 10 men facing charges of public violence after vandalism of buses in the Southern Cape are expected to apply for bail in the George Magistrates Court. There are a couple of interesting cases. After the break, we look at the escalating humanitarian crisis in Syria. What are the reasons and why the people are running from a country that has been flattened? You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News.
South Africans depend on our weather forecasts for their daily and weekly forecasts. Our weathercasters report current and forecasted weather conditions. They have a duty to provide accurate and impartial news. They present the weather logically and interestingly so that you understand, enjoy, and use the information in your daily lives. We are SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back. Now, the crisis in Syria continues to worsen and no resolution is yet in sight. The proud nation has been flattened through years now of bombing and continuous conflict. Now, producer Renee Vest has been monitoring the situation in the media and on the internet at large, and she's going to give us a breakdown of what we're not really seeing. Thank you very much, Renee.
Thank you, Urban. As the conflict in Syria enters its 5th year, there is growing international concern and pressure is building for President Bashar al-Assad to step down. The United Nations estimates that more than 220,000 people have died in the clashes between Assad's military, rebel forces, and foreign intervention since the start of the conflict. The revolutionary unrest in Syria began in March 2011 when protests erupted after the arrest and torture of some teenagers who painted anti-government slogans on a school wall. President Bashar al-Assad's regime was challenged, sparking violence when troops responded to these protests with aggressive crackdowns. 4 months later, after pro-democratic demonstrations were halted, the Free Syrian Army, a rebel force, was the first to take up arms. In 2012, Kurdish troops began to expand, and around the same time, the International Red Cross said that Syria was in a state of civil war. A year later, the Islamic Front formed along with Shia force Hezbollah in the support of the president. The Islamic State entered into Syria last year and have gained significant presence in the land since. Now, if we have the maps on screen here, please. Urban, I'd like to show you these maps over here. These maps are actually created by an 18-year-old student, Thomas van Linger, who maps the crisis in the Middle East. And as you can see over here, we have the President Assad's forces in the red. And this is from last year, actually. You'll notice the difference when we have a look at the conflict in the different areas in the map, the next map. The green forces represent the rebel forces.
Okay, so the rebels, if I can come in here, these are the territories that are run by the rebels. Those there as well, into Aleppo?
Yes,
well?
That's correct.
So this is how the country is kind of spliced up at the moment? And what's the yellow and the
Those are the Kurdish forces at the top.
Okay.
And as you can see, there's some grey areas there with black dots. That is ISIS-controlled areas.
I wanted to ask you about because we see thousands and thousands of people are leaving. Are they leaving via the sea? Are they walking out of the country? How are they getting to Europe?
They are crossing the borders throughout Syria over here, and that's how they're accessing the neighboring countries.
Well, it's a continuing humanitarian crisis that is happening in Syria right now. Let's take a look at some of your comments before we do an interview around the issues in Syria. What are some of the comments that we're seeing at the moment? Of course, the European Union is calling for immediate action. Your Cheese McBree says, thank God I don't live in Europe. Well, Sarah says, all the Syrian African refugees risking their lives to get to Europe when in a lot of cases GCC Arab countries are close. Any ideas as to why? Because there are opportunities, jobs, healthcare in Europe, in Germany in particular, that will help these people to resurrect their lives. Alexander Ulum says many children in Syria and Iraq that never had a childhood, talking about the refugee crisis in that country. And there you have a great picture. Refugees welcome. This is at a football match taken in Germany over the weekend. Germany are welcoming the refugees, and they are walking through countries like Hungary by foot, have to traverse fences. There you see a family, a refugee family, walking out of Syria on their way to Germany. Those injured in war, walking to Germany to try and resurrect their lives from this incredible conflict that has absolutely flattened their country. Yes, millions of Syrians have lost their belongings, their homes, and some of their loved ones as the civil war continues to destroy the place that they once knew. Now, almost 5 million people in hard-to-reach areas in the country do not have access to food or shelter, they say. Most of the 4 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt see no prospect of returning home in the near future and have little opportunity to restart their lives in exile, leaving some of even the brightest futures in a bleak and rather desperate state. But there's a ray of hope as 1 million Syrian citizens are now registered as refugees. Joining us via Skype from Geneva is the Senior Communications Officer for Iraq and Syria at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Ariane Rumeri. A very good morning to you, my dear. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
The UNHCR has reported that over 4 million people have been displaced. What impact is this mass movement having on the surrounding countries and then wider than that?
Well, it's having an enormous impact on the surrounding countries who are still really shouldering the burden of this huge humanitarian crisis. You take a country like Lebanon, which has over 1.1 million refugees. That's a quarter of its population, again, that it's hosting in refugees. Turkey is hosting 1.9 million refugees. And I think we need to keep this in perspective because there are increasing numbers going to Europe, but that's still just a fraction of the over 4 million that are being hosted by the surrounding countries. And of course, this is having an enormous impact. This is impacting on their health systems. In Lebanon, again, I mean, you have primary health centers who are having to cope with 40% again of people claiming their services. It's got an impact on electricity services, on water. Jordan is a country which is already not abundant with water, but of course having another 630,000 people that takes a strain. So it's very, very important that we keep this in perspective as the refugees are moving further afield. We need all countries around the world to play their part and make sure that they also play a role in giving refuge to these people who over the years have also given refuge to people themselves, like Iraqis and Palestinians who've had to flee other crises.
The camps are the big talking point, of course, the humanitarian camps that have been set up in neighboring countries. How many camps are you managing? And give us an idea of the conditions in the camps.
Well, the extent to which refugees are living in camps really depends from country to country. But the interesting thing is that most refugees don't live in camps. In Iraq, for example, which has about 250,000 refugees, we have about 10 camps that are set up, but only about 45% of the refugees are there. And then in Lebanon, for example, you have no formal camps at all. The government hasn't allowed camps, and people are living in urban areas. They're living in some informal settlements, in garages, in apartments, and so on. So it is just important to keep in mind that not all the refugees are in camps. Many of them are in urban areas. But those who are in camps, in many ways, it's a bit easier to provide them with services because you know where they are, and as time has gone on, we've been able to put in more services for the refugees, and there are some camps like Zatri camp in Jordan, which looks like a small city. It's got 80,000 people. It's got a market, which is dubbed the Champs-Élysées, where people can buy wedding dresses and cakes and things like that. Whereas in other camps, in more remote areas, which are less established, the conditions are less, less like a normal life. And people are still kind of really struggling to find their way. But I think it is important to recognise that most refugees aren't in fact in camps. And we did recent studies of refugees living outside of camps in Jordan, for example. And what we found is that the 86% of people who aren't living in camps are sliding into deeper and deeper poverty, because as this crisis goes into its 5th year, the resources that refugees had, their savings on which they relied for so long, are becoming increasingly depleted. And we're finding now, for example, that more than 80% of urban refugees in Jordan are living below the national poverty line. It's a similar picture in Lebanon, where over 70% of people. And that's why we really do need not only more support to the humanitarian programs, to the programs of UNHCR and its partners, but also to these governments who are hosting so many refugees so they can bolster their health systems, their education systems, etc., because they are really bearing the brunt of this crisis globally.
This weekend we saw a few around broadcasters and how broadcasters are approaching this, the issue of refugees, calling them migrants. How do you view refugees being called migrants, as they have been called throughout mainstream Europe for the last year or so?
Well, I think it's very important to make sure we understand the difference between refugees and migrants. And it's about the reasons that people flee. There are sometimes mixed flows of people, and these days when there aren't very many legal channels for refugees to arrive in Europe, they do travel alongside other people on the move who could be moving for different reasons. But by and large, the huge numbers of people arriving in Greece and Italy are from places like Syria, Iraq, and they are leaving because they're pushed out of their home. They're leaving, they're fleeing war, they're fleeing persecution, their houses have been destroyed. And many of these people are middle-class people like you and me. They're doctors or shopkeepers. And they're only now really leaving Syria because they have to save their lives. And I think while there are instances where there are some people on the move who aren't refugees, the vast majority of this particular flow into Greece and Italy are Syrians, and it would be just inaccurate to characterise that movement as a migration movement, because the key difference between a refugee and a migrant is about choice. Refugees have no choice. It's the push factors that are pulling them, not the pull factors.
Thank you for joining us today, Ariane. That is the Senior Communications Officer for Iraq and Syria with UNHCR, coming to you via Skype from Geneva. We're talking about, of course, the crisis not just in Syria, but it's the wider Middle East that's in peril at the moment. Over the weekend, we saw 2,000 years of history were wiped off the face of the earth when the Islamic State destroyed the ancient Baal Shamin temple in Palmyra in Syria last week. And this was not the first time. The Islamic State is fast occupying land in the Middle Eastern countries of Iraq and Syria. But when they take over the cities, they wipe away parts of that country's history by destroying ancient monuments, temples, and artifacts. Now, joining us today is Islamic State researcher from the Afro-Middle East Center, Omar Shokat. Good morning, Omar. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Everyone is concerned about the fact that we're losing these beautiful relics from all of our history, all of humanity's history has been wiped off the record by ISIS. everyone's asking why. Why do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said over here, but you know, we can't really understand any situation without understanding the context in which people operate. And there are two contexts to be understood first, and then I'll get to the explicit reasons that Islamic State articulates for why it's doing what it's doing. So the first contextual reason has to do with within these Islamic radical groups, you know, if you may use that term, you have a long tendency to target these you know, places that some of them view as places of idolatry. Yeah. So that's one reason. So because of Taliban, you might remember in Afghanistan in 2001, they engaged in something like this, which sort of set the benchmark for other groups, you know, that are broadly within the same sort of groups. They match themselves up to that, and they try to, you know, emulate that pattern. The other contextual reason is actually the U.S. invasion of Iraq. I mean, what often doesn't get remembered in narrating Islamic State's atrocities is very similar things that the American troops did. You know, they allowed the Baghdad National Museum, the National Library to be ransacked for 2 weeks. There were explicit orders, they don't protect these places. You know, looting happened at massive scales. In Babylon, in one of the most ancient sites of Babylon, Camp Babylon was set up, and lots of destruction happened. So within that pattern, the Islamic State does not see itself as doing anything new, but rather just continuing the old pattern. Even militias associated with the Iraqi government, they've been doing this explicitly. So for them, it's a way of making money at times, and like I said, at other times, you know, matching themselves within the radical groups. And then the other reason, or the last thing that they articulate themselves, is basically saying that these you know, historical monuments have become part of a nationalist history that they want to resist. Iraqi or Syrian identity is being constructed on these ancient remains, and that's what they're trying to contest.
We've just seen, of course, the refugee crisis, escalating refugee crisis. You were here, you saw some of that. Just ISIS's role in Syria. And then if you can maybe paint us the picture of what really is happening in the Muslim world in Syria, let's call it the two forces at play.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood your question. In the Muslim world in Syria? I mean, Syria is predominantly Muslim. So
yes, but Sunni Shia.
Okay. I mean, so ISIS obviously is a Sunni group, right? And it sees itself as a radical Sunni group. And within that pattern, I mean, they see Assad and anybody who associates with Assad as a kind of apostate, you know. And while the sectarian sort of identity of people in Iraq and Syria, the Alawites in Syria and the Shias in Iraq, that leads ISIS to sort of oppose them. But their explicit position is that if you repent or if you don't fight us, we will not fight with you. It's only when people have sectarian affiliations and that they're fighting them that they'll say, we're going to fight them. Now, obviously on the battlefield, you know, if you talk to ISIS sort of sources, they'll say this is the explicit position that I just articulated. But on the battlefield, lots of things can happen. And we are not always responsible for atrocities that happen on the ground. And, you know, so that's the broader sort of context in which this is happening.
Yeah.
But one also, because we're talking about historical antiquities and things like that, one has to be careful. They make a very big distinction between Shia shrines or Shia mosques versus historical mosques or historical places of worship. Yeah. And they would say one is, like I said, the latter one. The historical places are being targeted because of this nationalist appropriation of them, versus the Shia mosques are being targeted because of, you know, for them, active idolatry is happening in those places.
Active idolatry, that is the worship of symbols or monuments, or not monuments, what do you call, statues and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, so look, what idolatry is, there's a very long history, if you're familiar with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, within these monotheistic traditions, what exactly constitutes as idolatry. You know, interestingly, Judaism is more explicit on worship of, or not permitting worship of, you know, images with the second commandment, you know. Now, the Islamic State does not have anything that explicit within the Islamic corpus to draw upon, but what they will say is that people going to shrines, people visiting saints, whatever, regardless of what they're doing at those places, for them constitutes as worshipping those saints. So they will count that as idolatry. Majority of the Muslims will not count that as idolatry. I mean, even in South Africa, we have lots and lots of shrines and you know, visitations of shrines, especially in Cape Town area.
It's very, very, very interesting. The way forward, what is the way forward? How do we protect these sites, or is it too late?
I mean, look, to be very honest, if you ask me my opinion, I don't think we should make this about these sites. I'll give you an example from the Taliban time period. In 2000, the commander of the Taliban, Mullah Omar at that time, actually said he will protect the statues that were eventually destroyed. And he issued an edict against his own commanders who wanted to destroy it. The only reason he switched his opinion was when he, or according to him, when he realized that the world was actually more interested in ancient science than the people of Afghanistan. And that there were sanctions and there were things like that that were killing the people of Afghanistan. And people was, the national, the UNESCO was willing to pay money, the MoMA, the museum in New York, was willing to pay money for the remains, for the statues over there. And he said, now this has become active idolatry, hence this must be destroyed. And I think one has to be very careful because the destruction of these sites has actually increased since the UNESCO initiative to save these sites. If maybe we didn't focus on them that much and talked about everybody, the US, Iraqi government, and Islamic State all engaging in this kind of plundering, then maybe we would take away the incentive from Islamic State to target them.
Very interesting sentiments. Omar, thank you for joining us today. Omar Shokat is, he's a researcher from the Afro-Middle East Center. Of course, we're talking about the destruction of many said historic sites, others call it religious sites and so forth. It's continuing unabated at the moment, it seems. Let's have a look at what you can see on our Facebook page here at Newsroom. The Department of Mineral Resources, the mining industry and unions are expected to hold a top-level meeting today to find ways to save jobs in the sector. Then the body of a woman who died in Sierra Leone has tested positive for the Ebola virus. Less than a week after the last person confirmed to have had the disease was released from hospital. And President Barack Obama will today officially restore Denali as the name of North America's tallest mountain, siding with the state of Alaska in ending a 40-year battle over what to call a peak that has been known as Mount McKinley. For more updates, of course, it's on our Facebook page. On that story, interesting one it is, and others. Go to the search bar, type in Newsroom, SABC Newsroom, that is. Our name will pop up, like our page, and we'll send you updates on your Facebook page in live time. Time to take another break. He'll be back shortly.
Hello, it's a favorite minister here. Yane, party is a very nice language because it was written by you, the people. Here's a good one. Try hard, an individual who tries against all odds. Hoi! Give me water!
Help make party South Africa's 12th official language. Sign the petition today.
This one is good, hey?
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Mining industry stakeholders are expected to hold a top-level meeting to find ways to save jobs in the sector today. This after mining giant Lonmin announced that over 1,400 miners had taken voluntary retrenchments as it prepares to retrench a total of 6,000 workers by the end of the year. President Jacob Zuma has called for strict adherence to the rules of the road by all motorists. More than 100 people reportedly died in road accidents across the country over the weekend, with at least 46 people in the Eastern Cape province alone. And Swaziland's police are investigating the cause of the pile-up that has claimed the lives of scores of young women. On Friday, a disputed number of maidens on their way to the redance were killed in the accident. The Swaziland government says 13 people were killed in the crash, but opposition groups have given tolls varying from 38 to 65. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Simply search for SABC Newsroom. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thank you very much, Anina. African Union Chairperson Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is in the rural town of Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape today for the launch of a Women Development Resource Centre. The centre is aimed at empowering disadvantaged rural women in the area through co-ops with social development and income-generating skills in a wide variety of fields. The centre will be housed at Palmerton Resource Centre, a place of great significance to women in this area, once used as a rehab centre for young girls rescued from forced marriages at the height of the illegal practice of ukutwala. Now, for the latest, we are joined by our very own reporter, Unathi Bingose, coming to you live from Lusikisiki. Nati, good morning.
Indeed, I am coming live from Lusikisiki at Palmerton, to be exact. What I can tell you is that the rain that threatened to disturb us a little earlier on is gone now. But the grey skies remain. But you can tell that it's going to be a beautiful day altogether. Spring is around the corner. It is the Rape of Women's Month in South Africa as we know it. But I can tell you that some great initiative targeted at women is about to be launched here to ensure that the spirit of women emancipation, women empowerment carries on, especially in this rural district called Lusikisiki, a place that has been ravaged by the issues of ukutwala in the olden days. I mean, as you can see behind me, those are the stalls of some of the co-ops that are already operational in this area. These are the women that are going to mentor, the women that are going to be recruited from villages all around this area to come and get some training on sowing, training on crop production, animal production. Also, it's a wide variety of skills that they are going to be getting in this center here. We're told that it's still going to be used, the accommodation center that was used to accommodate those learners who were rescued from, rather those girls who were rescued from forced marriages, are still going to be used as dormitories for those women who will be recruited to come and get some training in this place. So it is a great initiative, and I can tell you that the dignitaries are already here. We've already spoken to Mama Nkosazana Zuma. She joined us a little earlier on in our sister program, Morning Live, to give us her perspective of what is happening here. And she says that according to the African Union, 2015 has been identified as the African Year of the Women, meaning that a lot of focus is going to be put on empowering women, not only here in South Africa, but all across the continent. And special focus is going to be placed on those rural women. And I can tell you now, the formal processions are about to get underway. The dignitaries who are locked inside there for some briefing are about to walk out and walk perhaps across right behind me into the marquee there, where formal proceedings are expected to take place. That's where all the rural women who have been invited to be part of this gathering here are going to gather to get some information on how to get involved in this beautiful initiative. As you probably can see where the camera is pointed at now, those are where the dignitaries were. We do expect some of them to walk out any time now. And of course, the guest of honor is the AU chairperson, Mama Nkosazana Zuma. And of course, she's joined by a couple of other local and provincial government officials. Among them is Social Development MEC and Nancy Sihlwai, and they're going to be telling these people about how to get involved in these initiatives and ensure that they do succeed in what will be happening here. With that, I think I can hand back to you, Eben, for now.
Nati, thank you very much for that update. That is our reporter, Unathi Bingose, coming to you live from Lusikisiki, where the Women Development Resource Centre will be launched by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma shortly there. Of course, today is the final day of Women's Month. We don't need a month, we need every day to be Women's Day. Anyhow, before we go, the Agency for New Agenda has launched an urgent court application to prevent the South African rugby team from participating in the 2015 Rugby World Cup in England and Wales next month. Very interesting story. The party also wants the court to order the executives to establish a judicial commission of inquiry into the lack of transformation in South African rugby, they say. Last Friday, Springbok coach Heineke Meyer announced his 31-man team, which consists of no less than 9 black players. The case is reportedly due to be heard in the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria tomorrow. It's a very interesting one. There's also been a response from the sports minister over the weekend to this perceived lack of what's going on. The call is a simple one from the officials. Let's support the team. Let's support the Springboks at the World Cup. That is the call. All South Africans, all of us, let's support the Boks in their quest for World Cup glory. Are we going to go to Mpho? Says 8 Africa. No, it's 9, Mpho, in the rugby squad. Is that transformation enough, fellow South Africans? The question is not, is it transformation enough? The question is it fair? So, South Africans are surprised by the SA rugby squad. Hintmeyer gives a toss about transformation. Numbers never lie, says Big Paul. Hutch says, I can't pretend to be in the loop in SA rugby, but what are the thoughts in the squad? Oh, the thoughts in the squad? It's a good squad. More players of colour than ever before. 9 in total. Works out to almost 30%, which is a transformation target that was set before the start of the tournament. So let's send them off and let's be like real South Africans. Let's be like Tada Nelson Mandela. Let's support the Boks and let them bring the cup home. And then we can fight amongst each other about numbers of transformation and so forth. I support the sports minister today. His call was, let's support the Boks and now, and let's talk later. Thank you, Minister Razmatas. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, but the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching this show. It's called Newsroom. It's on between 9 and 10 in the morning, and we love it every morning.